is still a profoundly moving statement of our values. It has never been more relevant than it is now.
The monarchy did not begin to shake because of a rumor. It began to shake because Prince William and Princess Anne reportedly stepped forward together and acknowledged that King Charles's future had become a serious subject of internal discussion. What had once been viewed as a private contingency was now being treated as an active matter of preparation. In one carefully managed moment, the future king and one of the monarchy's strongest supporters appeared to signal that the royal household was quietly preparing for a future beyond Charles's reign. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe so you never miss our latest royal updates. William seemed to understand the weight of the moment before he finished speaking. This was no ordinary palace statement or carefully crafted message meant to reassure the public. It felt like a turning point, where carefully chosen words could no longer hide growing concerns. Anne stood beside him with remarkable composure. She did not appear emotional, but her calm expression made the situation feel even more serious. The discussion centered on preparations for the future of the monarchy. These preparations referred to plans designed to ensure continuity if the king could no longer carry out every royal responsibility. Charles had not been removed or publicly challenged. Instead, the growing demands of the crown had reportedly made long-term planning unavoidable. The crown represents far more than a jeweled symbol. It carries the responsibilities of constitutional duty, public service, national ceremonies, and the continuity of the monarchy. For Charles, those responsibilities had become deeply personal. For William, they were moving closer than ever. For Anne, they had become a responsibility she could no longer postpone. During a reported family briefing, senior royals were informed that Charles might need increasing support with some of his constitutional and ceremonial responsibilities. A constitutional duty refers to the official responsibilities a monarch performs within the United Kingdom's constitutional system, even though elected officials hold political power. The room reportedly fell silent. William listened carefully, realizing that every sentence seemed to move him closer to a role he had spent his entire life preparing for, yet hoped would not arrive through his father's declining strength. Anne watched her brother not simply as a king, but as family. Charles quietly placed his pen on the table. The small gesture carried enormous emotional weight. It was not simply the end of a meeting, it symbolized the possibility that some responsibilities could no longer remain solely his. William noticed the significance immediately. Anne did as well. Beyond that private room, Camilla would soon discover that important discussions about the monarchy's future had already begun without her direct involvement. According to reports, one palace aide mentioned a private note Charles had placed inside a transition folder. The note was described as brief, personal, and sealed with planning documents. A transition folder refers to confidential papers used to organize responsibilities, access, and planning during a major constitutional change. The reported documents outlined which duties William would gradually assume, which responsibilities Anne would help oversee, and how certain royal roles could change if any transition became necessary. William showed no excitement. Instead, he appeared deeply affected by the responsibilities slowly approaching him. Anne remained composed, believing that while grief could wait, the stability of the monarchy could not. Charles remained almost completely silent. That silence seemed to communicate more than any speech could have. The tragedy was not that contingency plans existed. The tragedy was that acknowledging them had become easier than pretending they were unnecessary. Behind the formal language stood four people facing an extraordinarily difficult reality. Charles was not only a king confronting the limits of his reign, he was also a father watching his eldest son move closer to the throne. William was not only the heir to the crown, he was a husband, a father, and a future monarch trying to remain calm while history seemed to move toward him. Anne stood firm throughout the discussions, but even her determination could not completely hide the emotional weight she carried. For months, Charles had reportedly tried to keep any long-term succession planning limited to confidential meetings and private documents. Abdication refers to a monarch voluntarily stepping away from the throne. Even discussing that possibility may have felt like acknowledging that the reign he had waited decades to begin could end sooner than expected. Charles reportedly wanted to preserve dignity and stability. More than anything, he hoped William would inherit strength rather than uncertainty. William had spent his entire life preparing for duty, service, sacrifice, and leadership. Yet preparing for kingship in theory is very different from watching it suddenly move much closer to reality. Reports suggested that constitutional briefings were already being organized, with William expected to participate more directly alongside Charles. Even the seating arrangements seemed symbolic. The future no longer felt distant. It appeared to be entering the room. Anne understood the truth perhaps more clearly than anyone. She had stood beside Charles during some of the monarchy's most difficult periods, offering support when pressure mounted and speaking firmly whenever stability was threatened. Yet she also believed the institution could not survive through denial alone. If Charles struggled to acknowledge difficult realities himself, Anne appeared prepared to help carry that burden. Her loyalty to her brother remained unwavering, but so did her commitment to protecting the monarchy. Camilla reportedly felt deeply unsettled as she realized William and Anne appeared to know more about certain discussions than she did. Her reaction was not dramatic. Instead, her silence spoke volumes. For Camilla, the issue extended beyond Charles's health or William's future. It also involved influence, access, and the realization that important decisions regarding the king's reign were progressing without her complete involvement. According to reported palace records, Anne personally reviewed portions of the succession planning documents. An abdication file refers to confidential papers outlining procedures and responsibilities should a monarch ever prepare to step aside. Her reported involvement gave the planning additional credibility. Once Anne supported the process, many inside the palace reportedly viewed it not as emotional speculation, but as responsible preparation. Charles understood that delaying difficult conversations had only increased the emotional burden. William carried the responsibility of what might come next. Anne carried the responsibility of confronting reality. Camilla faced the shock of discovering that some decisions had advanced without her participation. Yet those discussions reportedly began long before the family briefing. According to this account, everything changed during a quiet dinner at Windsor Castle. Rather than a public ceremony or national address, it was a simple private moment that left a lasting impression. Charles reached for a briefing folder, paused, and quietly asked William to continue reading it aloud. That single request reportedly changed how William and Anne viewed the king's condition. Charles tried to make the request appear ordinary. He did not seek sympathy or offer an explanation. He simply stopped reading and handed the folder to his son. A briefing folder is a collection of official documents containing schedules, responsibilities, names, and decisions prepared for important royal meetings. On that evening, however, the folder seemed to represent something much greater. It became, according to this account, the first unmistakable sign that Charles was no longer simply tired. He appeared to need help carrying responsibilities he had always handled alone. William immediately sensed that the atmosphere had changed. He had reviewed official papers countless times throughout his royal life, but this felt entirely different. The king was not merely asking him to read a page. He seemed to be asking him to carry part of the burden of the crown itself. William looked down at the documents, then back at his father. In that moment, the meaning became impossible to ignore. This was more than routine delegation. Delegation means assigning responsibilities to another person for support. What William experienced that evening felt far deeper, more emotional, and far more significant. Anne watched the exchange carefully. As Charles lowered his eyes, she quietly realized that the monarchy had entered a new chapter, one that none of them had truly wanted to face. For the first time, Anne did not challenge him. The princess was known for her direct and unwavering manner, yet on this occasion, her silence carried more weight than any sharp response. She gently reached for the folder, closed it, and allowed the room to sit with the reality before them. Charles had waited his entire life to wear the crown. Now, the responsibilities of the monarchy were becoming too great to carry alone. That private dinner became a turning point. What had once been quiet concern now felt impossible to ignore. William realized the future was no longer somewhere in the distance. It was approaching far sooner than anyone expected. Anne understood that protecting Charles meant facing difficult truths before they became a public crisis. Within the monarchy, even the smallest sign of uncertainty at the top can affect public confidence in every ceremony, every constitutional responsibility, and every promise made in the crown's name. According to reports, Anne later requested a private review of the monarchy's succession planning documents. Succession planning refers to the confidential arrangements prepared to ensure royal responsibilities continue smoothly if leadership changes. Her calm but determined approach reportedly left little room for further delay. Palace officials could no longer pretend no preparations existed. The planning documents were already in place. One handwritten instruction reportedly stood out above the rest. Charles wanted William protected from unnecessary delays, internal disagreements, and outside interference during any future transition. The words themselves were simple, yet their meaning was profound. Charles appeared to understand that any transition could create tension within the family. He knew Camilla might view the process as a loss of influence, while William would likely see it as a responsibility he never wished to inherit under such circumstances. William never forgot that evening because it explained everything that followed. Anne carried the memory as proof that action could no longer be postponed. Charles carried it as the painful acknowledgement that change had become unavoidable. When Camilla reportedly learned that the quiet meeting at Windsor had helped trigger more formal planning, her reaction was not one of relief. It was anger. The sadness surrounding that private dinner soon gave way to a far more difficult conversation. The next meeting took place behind closed doors, away from cameras, ceremonies, and public appearances. William stood across from Camilla. Anne remained close to Charles. The atmosphere grew noticeably heavier as discussions about the monarchy's future could no longer remain hidden. According to this account, the transition plans were no longer quiet conversations in palace corridors. They were now openly being discussed. Camilla reportedly requested the meeting because she believed she had been left out of important decisions. As queen consort, she wanted to know why William and Anne appeared to know details of the planning, while she learned about them only after key discussions had already taken place. A transition plan refers to confidential arrangements designed to transfer responsibilities and authority during a major royal change. For Camilla, this was about more than paperwork. It concerned her role beside Charles, her influence during the closing years of his reign, and the possibility of being excluded from decisions that directly affected both of them. William answered without raising his voice. He understood that one emotional response could turn an already painful situation into a lasting family conflict. He explained that no one was acting out of ambition. The planning, he said, was driven by concern for Charles and by the belief that delaying difficult decisions could ultimately do more harm than good. His calm response only intensified the emotional weight of the conversation. Camilla expected confrontation. Instead, William offered restraint. Anne then spoke. Without raising her voice, she reminded everyone in the room that protecting Charles had to come before protecting anyone's position within the monarchy. That single statement shifted the discussion. It transformed the conversation from one about influence into one about responsibility. A royal position refers to a person's official role and influence within the institution of the monarchy. Anne believed that no position should ever become more important than the monarch's health, dignity, or long-term stability. Then Charles finally spoke. According to this account, he confirmed that he had authorized William and Anne to acknowledge preparations for the future because he could no longer manage every responsibility alone. Preparation for a possible transition refers to the planning carried out to ensure continuity if a monarch becomes unable to fulfill all official duties. Charles did not speak dramatically. He spoke with the quiet honesty of someone exhausted by trying to protect everyone else while carrying an increasingly heavy burden himself. Camilla remained silent. The confirmation itself was difficult enough, but what followed reportedly affected her even more. A confidential section of the planning documents limited her involvement during any future transition and stated that responsibility for key decisions would rest elsewhere. For Camilla, those pages represented far more than administrative paperwork. They symbolized a future in which her influence would be significantly reduced. William looked toward his father and finally understood why Charles had remained silent for so long. The king was not trying to exclude anyone. He was trying to ensure that personal disagreements would not interfere with the stability of the monarchy. Anne understood the reasoning as well. Years of royal service had taught her that uncertainty often creates division, and division can weaken both families and institutions. When Charles quietly pushed back his chair and left the room, no one attempted to stop him. He did not leave in anger. He left with the quiet dignity of a monarch who understood that a new chapter had already begun. Camilla remained seated, absorbing what she had just heard. William stood silently, aware of the responsibility moving steadily toward him. Anne remained composed, but her expression suggested that an even greater challenge still lay ahead, because beneath every difficult conversation was something even more important. It was the quiet structure that kept the monarchy functioning during moments of uncertainty. And according to this account, no one understood that responsibility better than Princess Anne. She did not need a crown to command respect. Her discipline, composure, and unwavering sense of duty gave her influence that extended far beyond any formal title. As Charles gradually stepped back and William prepared for greater responsibility, Anne became the steady bridge between one reign and the next. She was not seeking power, she was seeking stability. That made Anne's influence even more significant. When she reportedly placed her hand on the transition file, even Camilla appeared to recognize that the balance within the royal household had begun to shift. Anne accepted the responsibility because Charles trusted her at a time when trust had become increasingly important. The king reportedly believed his sister would never flatter him, avoid difficult conversations, or allow family disagreements to overshadow the stability of the monarchy. An internal transition schedule refers to confidential palace planning that outlines how official duties, meetings, and responsibilities could gradually move from one senior royal to another. For Charles, it helped preserve dignity. For William, it offered structure for the future. For Anne, it represented the line between stability and uncertainty. William increasingly relied on Anne because she treated him as a future monarch rather than someone who needed constant reassurance. She offered honesty instead of comfort. She advised him when patience was necessary, when action was required, and when hesitation could no longer be mistaken for wisdom. The crown, representing royal responsibility and constitutional authority, appeared to be moving toward William much sooner than anyone had expected. Anne reportedly wanted to make sure he was ready. Her influence extended far beyond ceremonial appearances. According to this account, she helped oversee the timing of important discussions, managed family access, and determined which confidential matters reached William before any formal transfer of responsibilities. A formal handover refers to the planned transfer of key royal duties from one senior member of the monarchy to another. Timing mattered. Moving too quickly could place unnecessary pressure on Charles. Moving too slowly could leave William unprepared for responsibilities approaching far sooner than anticipated. Anne understood those risks better than most. Years of royal experience had shown her how even small mistakes could grow into lasting institutional problems. Charles reportedly experienced mixed emotions. Anne's support gave him confidence, yet every decision she made also reminded him that he could no longer manage every responsibility alone. He appreciated her loyalty. At the same time, accepting her help meant accepting that change was becoming unavoidable. That was the difficult balance. Her commitment helped protect both Charles and the monarchy, but it also highlighted that the previous way of doing things could not continue indefinitely. Camilla reportedly watched Anne's growing influence with increasing concern. Unlike others, Anne was not seeking attention or recognition. That made her difficult to challenge. Ambition can be questioned, emotion can be debated, but quiet discipline often speaks for itself. According to this account, when Camilla saw Anne reviewing the transition documents, she realized that decisions surrounding Charles's future no longer rested with her alone. Reports also suggest Anne discovered differing opinions within the palace regarding how quickly any public announcement about future royal changes should be prepared. An abdication announcement refers to the official public statement issued if a monarch chooses to step away from the throne. Some advisors reportedly believed more time should be given in the hope that Charles could continue carrying out his duties. Others believed delaying important decisions would only create greater uncertainty later. Anne reportedly remained calm. After reviewing the documents, she asked one direct question: who benefits from waiting? The answer, according to this account, appeared within a confidential clause that Charles had already approved. William was reportedly authorized to begin transition briefings before any public announcement regarding the king's future. A clause is a specific instruction included within a larger official document. That single provision reportedly changed the entire process. It allowed William to prepare quietly before the public understood why those preparations had become necessary. It also enabled Anne to guide that preparation without additional delays. For Camilla, however, it reportedly marked the beginning of an even greater shift. When Anne closed the file, those present reportedly understood that a new phase had already begun. Charles had placed his trust in her judgment. William had accepted her guidance. Camilla had witnessed the balance within the royal household changing before her eyes. The machinery of succession was already moving quietly beneath the family's private concerns. Once William entered those confidential briefings, it became increasingly difficult to describe the situation as only a private family matter. The changes did not arrive dramatically. Instead, they appeared through small moments that carried enormous meaning. A chair was moved, a meeting list was updated, a senior aide instinctively addressed William first, before quickly correcting himself. Charles noticed. Camilla noticed. Anne noticed everything. Although no public announcement had been made, the rhythm of responsibility inside the palace seemed to be changing. Attention was slowly shifting from the reigning monarch toward the future king. William reportedly began attending meetings that had once been reserved exclusively for Charles. No one openly discussed the significance, yet everyone appeared to understand it. A transition briefing is a confidential meeting where future royal responsibilities, schedules, and constitutional duties are planned before a major change. For William, these meetings no longer felt like preparation alone. They increasingly resembled the responsibilities he would soon be expected to carry. According to this account, Charles watched as William answered official questions with calm confidence. The king reportedly felt two powerful emotions at the same time: relief that his son appeared ready, and sadness, because that readiness reminded him that his own reign would not last forever. Every confident answer strengthened confidence in William, yet each one also reminded Charles that the responsibilities of the crown were gradually moving away from him. That contrast filled the room with quiet emotion. William's growing confidence represented hope for the monarchy. For Charles, it also marked the gradual closing of an era. Anne remained nearby throughout the process. She understood that discipline was the only way to prevent a difficult transition from becoming a damaging public conflict. One poorly timed meeting, one emotional disagreement, or one confidential leak, any of them could transform private sadness into a national controversy. A handover refers to the carefully planned transfer of responsibilities from one royal figure to another. In this situation, it involved far more than schedules and ceremonies. It concerned Charles's dignity, William's future, and the long-term stability of the monarchy itself. Anne watched everything closely: the timing, the conversations, the people entering and leaving the room, even the smallest details. Camilla reportedly felt the change most strongly after one briefing ended. She sat quietly, slowly removing her gloves while reflecting on everything that had taken place. There had once been a time when she stood closest to Charles during important decisions. Now, according to this account, many of those discussions were increasingly passing through Anne and William. No explanation was necessary. The meaning had become clear. Her influence had not disappeared overnight. Instead, it had gradually been reduced, one quiet decision at a time. William noticed another subtle sign while reviewing the palace calendar. Several upcoming engagements had quietly changed. Events that once carried Charles's name now listed William instead. No announcement had been made. But inside the palace, the future already appeared to be taking shape. The palace calendar is the official schedule that organizes royal duties, public engagements, ceremonies, and appearances. Within the monarchy, it represents far more than dates. It reflects priority, visibility, and responsibility. According to this account, William saw his future gradually appearing on those pages long before the public noticed any change. Anne later received what was described as a private warning from a senior palace official. The message was direct. Waiting too long could cause greater damage than preparing openly. Anne remained composed. She believed delaying difficult decisions might protect emotions for a short time, but could weaken public trust for years. Charles deserved dignity. William deserved preparation. Neither, she believed, should depend entirely on silence. Charles reportedly sensed the transition unfolding around him. He watched William gather his notes. He watched Anne quietly close the file. He knew Camilla had withdrawn into silence. Then the king asked William to remain behind. The request was simple, but it changed the atmosphere completely. William stopped. Anne understood immediately and quietly left the room. Camilla was not called back. For the first time that day, palace business disappeared, leaving only a father and his son. There were no advisors waiting outside, no officials carrying briefing folders, no carefully prepared statements, only Charles and William sitting together in silence. Between them rested decades of duty, sacrifice, love, disappointment, and uncertainty. When Charles finally spoke, he did not begin as a king. He spoke as a father. William listened, not as the heir to the throne, but as a son, realizing that one chapter of his life had quietly come to an end. According to this account, Charles admitted that the earlier briefing had made everything feel painfully real. Watching William confidently handle official responsibilities had filled him with both reassurance and sadness. A transition briefing is a confidential meeting where future royal responsibilities are discussed before any formal transfer of duties takes place. For Charles, it demonstrated that William was capable. For William, it was another reminder that his father's role was slowly changing. William allowed his father to speak without interruption. This conversation was no longer about schedules, documents, or palace procedures. It had become deeply personal. Abdication refers to a monarch voluntarily stepping away from the throne. Within this family, however, the word seemed to represent something even greater. It represented loss. Charles was no longer discussing constitutional planning. He was sharing the fears he had carried in silence. According to this account, the king admitted that his greatest concern was not William's ability to lead. Instead, he feared leaving behind a monarchy burdened by division, distrust, and unresolved family tensions. William heard the emotion behind those words. For a brief moment, even the future king struggled to find the right response. When he finally spoke, he answered as a son. He told Charles that he feared losing his father to duty far more than he feared inheriting the crown itself. That admission transformed the conversation. Titles no longer mattered. Rank disappeared. A royal heir is the person next in line to inherit the throne. But in that room, William was not thinking about succession. He was thinking about his father. Charles lowered his eyes as William quietly reached for his hand. The gesture lasted only a moment, yet it expressed more than any official statement ever could. Charles had spent a lifetime controlling his emotions. For one brief moment, that distance disappeared. William was not reaching for power. He was reaching for his father. According to this account, Charles then explained why Anne had become so closely involved in the transition planning. He told William he trusted his sister to protect the process from internal disagreements because she would never allow personal interests to outweigh duty. A transfer refers to the gradual movement of responsibilities from one royal figure to another. Charles trusted Anne because she remained steady under pressure. William trusted her because she always spoke honestly, even when the truth was difficult to hear. William immediately understood what his father meant. He recognized that delays could appear respectful on the surface, while quietly creating greater problems behind the scenes. He made one promise. He would never pursue the throne out of ambition, but neither would he avoid responsibility out of fear. According to this narrative, that promise brought Charles a sense of peace that no official briefing ever could. It assured him that William would lead with patience, humility, and restraint. Charles accepted the promise without another word. In that quiet moment, the emotional transfer between father and son had already begun, not through ceremony, not through proclamation, but through trust. William left the room changed. Charles remained behind, carrying both relief and sadness. By the following morning, the story could no longer be contained. Reports and speculation spread rapidly across Britain, creating a wave of public discussion. Many people did not simply hear that preparations for the future were underway. They felt as though an era was slowly drawing to a close. Grief and expectation existed side by side. William appeared before the public with remarkable composure. He understood that every expression, every word, and every gesture would be carefully examined. Public reaction refers to the response of citizens, journalists, and national institutions when major royal developments become known. For the monarchy, public confidence matters deeply. If people believe a transition is carefully managed, stability is reinforced. If they believe uncertainty has taken over, confidence can quickly weaken. Charles remained largely out of public view while conversations about the monarchy intensified. Although he was still king, many people began reflecting on his reign with a sense of nostalgia. Commentators increasingly described William and Anne's reported acknowledgement as evidence that a significant transition could be approaching. A reign is the period during which a monarch serves on the throne. For Charles, it represented the fulfillment of a lifelong destiny. Its possible conclusion naturally became the focus of national attention. Anne unexpectedly became one of the central figures in that conversation. Some observers described her as the guardian of the transition. A handover refers to the careful transfer of responsibilities from one royal figure to another. To many, Anne appeared to represent stability during a deeply emotional period. Her role was seen as protecting Charles's dignity while helping William prepare for greater responsibility. Outside Buckingham Palace, members of the public gathered in growing numbers. Some brought flowers, others simply stood in silence. Buckingham Palace has long served as a symbol of national feeling during important royal moments. According to this account, the atmosphere reflected both gratitude for Charles and hope for William. The same crowd seemed to express farewell and expectation at the same time. Camilla reportedly viewed the public reaction with quiet reflection. The conversation had shifted. Attention was no longer centered on palace relationships. Instead, people were asking whether Charles would be supported and whether William was ready for what lay ahead. William also felt the emotional weight of the moment whenever his father's name arose in conversation. Those around him reportedly noticed the strain beneath his calm expression. He was being praised for his readiness, while quietly carrying concern for the man who had prepared him for that responsibility. That was perhaps the hardest part. The more prepared William appeared, the more people began to recognize that Charles's reign was entering a new chapter. One newspaper reportedly captured the national mood with a simple headline, "The Long Goodbye." Those words resonated because they expressed emotions that official palace language could never fully convey. Charles remained king. The crown endured. Yet emotionally, many people felt that history had already begun to turn. Palace officials continued working to reassure the public. But according to this account, the reported confirmation from William and Anne carried greater emotional impact than any prepared statement. Inside the monarchy, everyone understood that something had changed. And when the public discussion finally settled, the deeper meaning became impossible to ignore. The greatest tragedy was not the existence of plans for the future. It was that acknowledging them required the family to confront what love, loyalty, and royal duty had tried to postpone. One reign appeared to be moving toward its final chapter. Another seemed to be approaching sooner than anyone had imagined. Through it all, Anne remained a steady presence, standing between duty and heartbreak. William understood that, once the discussions had reached this point, there could be no return to the way things had been before. The future of the monarchy no longer existed only in private planning. According to this narrative, it had become part of the royal reality. Abdication refers to a monarch voluntarily stepping away from the throne. According to this account, for the royal family it no longer felt like a distant possibility. It had become a reality they could no longer ignore. At this moment, the monarchy faced more than a personal family challenge. It faced the responsibility of protecting an institution built on continuity, stability, and public confidence. Silence alone could no longer carry that responsibility. It required careful planning, thoughtful timing, and difficult decisions from those closest to the king. Charles appeared to reach a moment of quiet acceptance. His greatest sorrow was not simply the thought of surrendering responsibility. It was recognizing that the people he loved most now had to help him do so with dignity. A reign is the period during which a monarch serves on the throne. For Charles, however, it represented decades of patience, sacrifice, and lifelong dedication. According to this narrative, protecting that reign now meant preparing responsibly for whatever came next. William never approached the situation as a victory. His strength came through restraint rather than ambition. He accepted growing responsibility carefully, understanding that the country needed to see duty above all else. He recognized that moving too quickly could create the impression that Charles had been pushed aside. Waiting too long, however, could leave the monarchy appearing uncertain. So William found himself carrying two responsibilities at once, protecting his father's dignity while preparing for the future of the crown. Anne remained one of the most steady figures throughout the process. Rather than allowing emotion to overwhelm difficult decisions, she focused on maintaining stability. A transition is the carefully planned transfer of duties and responsibilities from one senior royal to another. According to this account, Anne's role was described as one of quiet protection and steady leadership. She did not seek control. She provided stability when others were carrying the emotional weight of the moment. Camilla's changing role reflected another difficult reality. According to this narrative, she was not removed from the story, but her influence during the final stage of Charles's reign appeared to become more limited. She reportedly came to understand that Charles had placed considerable trust in both Anne and William as preparations continued. That realization was deeply personal. It reflected where the king believed responsibility for the future should rest. The crown represents far more than royal authority. It symbolizes duty, continuity, and service to the nation. According to this account, the monarchy's future depended on those trusted to preserve those principles above personal interests. Charles was not forgotten. William was not driven by ambition. Anne was not seeking power. Camilla was not erased from the family. Instead, each person faced a different responsibility during an exceptionally difficult period of change. Together, Their individual roles reflected the emotional cost of preparing for the future while honoring the past. Ultimately, this account suggests that the monarchy chose stability over uncertainty. Rather than continuing to rely on silence alone, it embraced preparation, responsibility, and honesty. The closing of one chapter was marked by sadness, yet it also created the opportunity for another chapter to begin, with order, continuity, and respect for everything that came before. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest updates. We'll see you in the next video.